Hey everyone, Urban Fish Keeper here. I hope you're all doing well, you've had a good week and you're having a good weekend. So today's video is probably one that's going to create more questions than answers, if anything in my mind, and it's around water. So over the last 8 months, 9 months, I've been observing my fish behavior. Depending on what I'm breeding, I've been observing the water and the filtration and all those factors that go around keeping and breeding aquarium fish, in particular in the smaller aquariums. Now very recently, as in a couple of weeks back, I started noticing something. And I started noticing it in this aquarium here. Now those of you who have seen my previous videos would have noticed that in this aquarium before I had a whole lot of small discus, and those were the discus that were being grown up that I had artificially reared. Those discus, the ones that are left, as in that haven't been sold, are sitting in one of the 100-litre cubes on that side and doing fine. There's probably about 10 of them in that aquarium. But when they were in here, before I put the angels in, I noticed two things in this aquarium. I noticed, one is the bubbles at the top coming out of the filter seemed, out of the sponge filter or the bend, the bubbles seemed soapy, if that makes any sense. So they weren't like free-flowing, cracking bubbles. They almost seemed soapy, like they were sticking together. Unlike this aquarium here, that has the Bacardi that has harder water. When I was cleaning this tank, I also noticed and felt on my hands that it felt almost soapy. Is probably the best way of explaining it. And then the big thing for me was I noticed that when the discus were in here, it got to a point where I started seeing white markings on the fin. And not white markings that you would associate with something like fin rot, but almost as if they had been damaged or bitten by another fish, but not quite the same. And on closer inspection, it looked to me almost like the fins were being burnt, like damage from being burnt by something in the water. That then prompted me to start thinking about what are my actual water conditions, because I don't do pH that often. I don't check the pH every time I do a water change. And what I've also been trying to do over the months is I've been trying to reduce the amount of water changes I do to see what impact or what difference that has on the breeding and the keeping. Now there are certain fish where water changes are critical and you have to do it because you want to induce spawning or in order to just keep the water levels where you want it, especially in these smaller aquariums. Now to give you an example, those of you that have seen my video on my large aquarium that's on the inside of the house, the 950-litre tank that's got discus in it, that tank is down to, there's about 5 discus left in there, and there's about 8 catfish in there, and there's a pair of blue and black rams in there as well that I just moved out of these. When I finished breeding, I sold off, and then I had 1 pair left and I just put them in there. They were the original pair. Now that aquarium, the last time I did a water change on that aquarium, as in dropped 20% or 25%, was at the end of May 2021. So what's that, 6-7 months ago was the last time I did a water change in that aquarium. And during that period, up until now, those discus and are still doing really well. Now we could argue and say, well, it's 950 litres, you've got 5 discus in there, you've got a couple of catfish. There's not a big load on that aquarium to really affect the water changes. The other thing is there's a massive bush in the center of plants growing. Now in a 950 it doesn't look big, but I can guarantee you that it's bigger than one of these 64s as in size. So I've got those plants in there. It made me think, well, what was causing this whiting on the fins with the discus? I then moved the discus over, put them in another tank. That white finning has gone away and they're doing really well in that other aquarium. I then got the angels and popped the angels in this tank, and within probably 2 days I started noticing the same on the fins. And I was a bit concerned, and that's why when I introduced the angels to all of you, I said I might actually move them to the big aquarium if they don't settle down and do well here. And again, the same thing here. I was, unless I felt I had to do a water change for a reason, like to induce spawning or something, there's no reason why I was going to do a water change. I'm a firm believer, if you don't have to do water changes, don't do them. There must be a reason for it. Now, it could be because there's a high amount of fish in the aquarium and you need to change the water because the aquarium can't cope with the bioload, or you want to induce spawning, and there's reasons for doing that water changes. But if there's no reason, then I'm trying to see how long I can stretch some of these water changes. Based on the observation I was seeing, I thought, oh well, let me have a look and see what's happening with pH. And maybe it's an acid burn, but I hadn't read or seen anything about acid burn on fins or fish's fins if the water pH gets too low. So if you have a look at the video, this is the video of my big tank. And I've tried to take a bit of video footage here, but there's so much reflection, I hope you can see. And that one's been going, 6-7 months now without any water change. And the fish are doing fine. They don't get fed heavy, so there's probably not a massive bioload, and it's got this big piece of plant in it. But I would expect the pH to be, probably around about the 6 point something mark. So I did a check on that this morning, and the pH on the big tank is sitting at 6.8. So the pH is fine, the fish are fine, the water looks good, that tank's doing okay. But I haven't done a water change on that tank for such a long time. So what are the factors that are contributing to stabilizing or buffering that pH at about 6.8? I've got natural gravel in there. Is there something maybe in the gravel? Could it be the background that I've got in there that's maybe leaching something in the water that's causing it to buffer? I'm not too sure. But from a pH point, it's doing fine. Now, let's go to these guys. When I started looking this morning at these tanks up here, and I started doing readings, and I'll share some of these with you as well so you can see me. And also I've calibrated the pH meter, so the pH meter is good. The ones that have the plants in, like the crebensis one that's got a fair amount of floating plants in, I did a test on that, and that tank is sitting at 6.0, so a pH of 6. Now I don't necessarily have a problem with that. 6 is fine. I'm okay with the cribs being 6. Probably like a little bit higher, but don't have a problem with the cribs being in a 6. I've also did some water changes on these tanks on Friday evening, and the water that I'm using, as you all know, I have down here, I have a couple of buckets, and that's got my aged water in. So that water has been aged, today's Sunday. That water has been in those buckets aging since Friday evening. So I'll just pop the pH meter in here, give it a swirl around. It's not the quickest reading pH meter, so just bear with me for a second while that's happening. On the same, just around the pH, I also then decided to look at the cube. So if you look at one of my previous videos where I've done the little 4.5 litre cubes on the book rack, those cubes, I've done 2 water changes on those cubes since I started that setup, and that's been a while, and that's 4.5 litres per cube. So you would expect waste and breakdown and all the rest of it to be affecting the pH or the water quality, nitrites, nitrate, all the rest of it. I did a check, and if you have a look at this video footage, this is the one that's got 5 of the Hengel's Rasboras in that aquarium. It's got some plants in it. It's a 4.5 litre, and I've done 2 water changes on that. Other than that, I just top it up, and they're doing perfectly fine. I did a check on that cube this morning, and that cube is also sitting at a pH of 6. So for them, that's fine, no problem. As you can see, my aged water, and hopefully you can see that, 7. Okay, pH of 7 is the aged water. I did a 20 litre change on the 60, call it 60 litres. So I did a third water change. I did a smaller water change on the Bacardi, and on the Discus I did a third water change. Now, when we go back up to these little 20s that have been running now for probably, what, almost a year, 8 months, 9 months, the Crebenz one was really interesting, and that one was around the 6 from a pH point of view. But as soon as I started going to one of the aquariums that had no plants in it, there's only 2 fish in here, but the filter has been running for a while. What is that pH like? Was what I was thinking. So I decided to do a check, and I'm going to show you that pH reading now. I'll do it so you can see me do the reading. The other thing is pH is affected by a couple of things. So either your water naturally is a water that is soft, and although it comes out of the tap, maybe it's 7 or 7 point something or even higher, once it's left and it airs and it settles, that water pH naturally starts dropping to where it then finds itself. In my case, my aged water settles at about 6.87, which is water straight out of the tap, nothing more to it. When you've got anything organic in an aquarium, like wood or anything that breaks down, organic waste or the rest of it, that has got a tendency to lower your pH naturally. That's because the wood breaking down releases CO2 into the water, or carbon compounds in the water, and that then causes the pH to drop. Now, in this aquarium that has no plants, other than 2 fish, it's the same as the one next to it. It's got 2 fish, it's got some plants in it. And in actual fact, this one's got more wood in it than this one here. The pH in the Crebenzes was 6. The pH in this one, and just to also add, I did a 10% water change across these yesterday. I'll do a pH check for you here. And this is not a faulty pH meter I've calibrated this morning. .4. Okay, that is what that pH has come down to in this aquarium. Has come down to 3.4. That is ridiculously low, dangerously low. So I'm going to have to put in something here to buffer. Now you may argue and say, well, you know what, maybe that's just that tank. But I'm starting to notice in the behavior of the fish as well that 3.4 is having an effect on the fish. So pH is becoming a bit of a challenge for me, which it never has been, but to try and keep it a little bit more stable. And what I'm going to do now is, here we've got an aquarium that's got, sorry that my back turned to you, that's got coral sand in it, okay? It's had a much smaller water change than the tank next to it. It's got 3 adults and a whole lot of little ones in it. And I'll do a pH on that one. Also, has no plants. Sorry, it just takes a couple of seconds, so just bear with me. So on this tank, I would probably like the pH to be closer to 8. But anything above 7, I'll be happy with. Okay. And that water is being buffered by the coral sand, in my opinion. The biolode's not that heavy, but it's got more fish in it than some of the other smaller ones. And that's sitting at 7.6. Okay. So 7.6 pH. So that one's perfect. These two aquariums are the same size. Now, since the water change on the one that has the angels in, because when I started noticing the white on the fins, and in my opinion it was related to pH. Water change on Friday, a third of the water. It's got some wood in it. They're eating really well, so there's organic waste. Let's see what the pH on this one is now. And considering the water that's going in is 7. .2. That pH has dropped to 4.2. And that is what I think, in my opinion, has been causing what seems to me to be fin burning. And maybe that's why the behavior of some of my fish. Now I can almost assure you that if I check the discus one, it would be very similar to what this angel water is at the moment. Anyway, so I just wanted to share with you some of the challenges I'm having around this. What I'm going to have to do is try and buffer some of this, and the way that I like to buffer water is that I just add some coarse coral pieces. Just drop a couple of coarse coral pieces in the back of the aquarium, and that calcium into the water will then buffer the pH and cause the pH to rise and stabilize it a bit more. I could, excuse me, I could remove the wood out of here and that may slow down the pH drop. But in here I've got 6 angels, there's a 60-litre tank. The filtration is fine. There is organic waste in here occurring every day. That's forcing that pH down as well, and there's nothing to buffer it. So I just wanted to share some of these things with you. And this wasn't happening a few months back, so it's, you know, for whatever reason, I mustn't say a few months. These ones have always been reasonably stable. These tanks, especially the discus one, has been, the pH has always dropped. And I think in one of my previous ones, the pH in that was down to 4, 3.8 or something ridiculous. So what I'm realizing is that I need to do some buffering, so I'll use some coral to buffer it and just get my water a little bit more stable. But yet in other ones, you know, if you take the little cubes, and you would expect those cubes, if pH was going to be a factor and make a big difference there, with 5 fish in a 4.5 litre, there's plants. So the question has to be, do the plants have an effect on helping to buffer the pH? I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure. You know, is it because they reduce or they remove a lot of the CO2 in the water, and therefore by reducing the CO2, that is not free in the water there to affect the pH? That is possible, but I haven't done enough to be able to say convincingly that that is the reason why in the ones where the pH seems more stable, that it has plants, that it's the plants that are reducing the CO2 in the water, and that's preventing the pH from dropping dramatically down. Anyway, so what I'll do is I'm going to put a couple of coral pieces in here. I'll probably add a bit of coral pieces in the discus one. I may add in the ones that have plants, add some coral pieces. This one that's got the pair of apistogramma, the golds in there. Same thing there, sitting at about 6, and I'm comfortable with that. Crebences are fine. And again, you know, the only difference is they've got plants in them. So maybe it is the plants, maybe the plants are the factor. Maybe what I need to do is get a bunch of Anubias and maybe put Anubias in here before I put the coral in, and see if that then starts to regulate or bring the pH more in line. Anyway guys, I just wanted to share that with you. I wanted to share some of my observations and some what's been happening. And I really would like and it's been a bit of a long video, so my apologies. But I would like some of your feedback. You know, drop some comments in what you found. Have you found similar behavior where you've got a clear tank a couple of pieces of wood as your pH gone wild, those kind of things. So have a, you know, if you don't mind, just drop some comments in, tell me what your thoughts are, what your views are, what you're thinking. I'm going to experiment a bit more and play around with it, and I'll let you know how that goes. But other than that, have an awesome week. Have a good weekend further. Look after yourselves, stay safe. Till the next video, Urban Fish Keeper out.